Hi, welcome to From Thinking to Inking, Episode 1, Part 5. I'm your host, TJ Mercer, and today we wrap up our deep dive into Shifted by Caitlyn Mitchell and reach the end of the story. So, if you haven't read the book yet, now is your last chance before you know how it ends. But you still have the option of reading The Roaring Boys, also by Caitlyn Mitchell, and that is also available on Amazon. So, I hope you enjoy this final dip into the world of Shifted. A part that I found so there's a really long dinner conversation, and she's not really hungry because she scratched him and she feels bad, and he's not really hungry because he's like in a lot of pain, but he's playing it off as he's sad because she's hurt, which he actually is, but he
Hmm.
also just feels like if he eats anything he'll throw up. um, but the dishes are not willing to accept that, and so they keep trying to give them food. And
Yeah.
the image that kept popping in my head, I'm just curious if it influenced this scene at all, was in Sword in the Stone, the sugar um, canister holder, the sugar cup that just is like very insistent that you will have sugar in your tea, and just
I
keeps
haven't
beating
thought
up
about
on the other
that.
dishes. And
I haven't thought about that in years. I think the last time I saw that movie, I was probably about 8, maybe younger even.
Oh, you should watch that one again. It's
Yeah,
delightful.
yeah, that definitely a fantastic cartoon. No, I honestly I hadn't thought about that at all, but I love the comparison. More I was thinking of so I get very when someone I love or is close to me is not feeling good or is sick or ill, I get very um uh, I want to take care of them, and often my love language is food. What can I bring you? What can I get you? And so in that regard, the dishes are kind of a character kind of like that. You're not feeling good. Both of you are hurt. Here, eat something. It's also I think it's just a very uh, uh, German. I mean, I guess any culture has the mother who feeds you. I was thinking German and Scottish, but that's also very prevalent in like Jewish kind of mother stereotypes, Italian, anything. Uh, so that need to feed
Basically
someone.
anyone but British.
And British, yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what those dishes are trying to do. They're trying to take care of their unwilling charges, in a very motherly kind of way. So that's where that was coming from. But the sugar pot, I'm sure, is in there somewhere at the back of the rest of the dishes, trying to get attention.
And so on that, this is when you actually start to reveal that, oh, they're the original servants and stuff are trapped in this house as well. Because the way that you originally described it, it sounded like Bree was kind of like pulled out of time for a little while, and then
Hmm.
was put into the house after it went decrepit. And so she's just been living in it, inside of its ruined state. But now you find out that Robin actually, in this emphasizes how powerful he is. Like, you didn't realize how strong he was until this, that he actually like destroyed the house and everything in it and put her back in.
Hmm.
And it was actually the same time, or it was like a couple hours after she took the rose and he took out his vengeance on her.
Yeah.
Um, so um, so this is when you start to see the service and stuff. Why did you decide to reveal that now? I guess.
Um, let's see, because that's when they're in Bree's room, and they're talking about themselves and their history, and um it just seems to me like something that would come up that they're just chatting about, and Lewis is like, Bree is telling him a bit about some of the servants she used to know, and Lewis, mentions, yeah, there's this little breeze or this little mutter that is taking care of me in my room, and he describes it to her, and she has the realization that might be them. And in a way, it's another bit of knowledge that forces Bree to look outside of herself. One of the things that got her into this mess in the first place was, being a bit self-centered. As she even says it herself, she never considered that the roses weren't hers to take. And obviously, the punishment was way out of bounds with the crime, but it also reflects something she's still learning about. She's still learning that there are other things going on beyond, either what she perceives or her own, misery inside the curse. And um, this is kind of the first time in centuries that she has considered they might still be around. And it's Lewis who points that out to her. Um, and it also gives her a little bit of hope that maybe they're still here, maybe they're still alive. We find out later that that's not the case, but it's a reflection of these people who took care of her when she was a little girl, and they're in some ways they're still taking care of her even inside the curse, and now they're taking care of Lewis as well. So they're learning about each other. They're also learning more about the curse and what their lives were like. And it's just a nice conversation between two people. But also I felt like it probably would have come up between them at some point. This element of magic or kind of weirdness in the castle. There are certain elements of it that they don't really discuss. They talk about the library. Obviously now they talk about the kind of invisible servants. One thing that they don't really talk about is like the house moving around. Um, that I think kind of lies beyond the bounds of what's explainable, so it never really comes up. It just is. But there are certain things that they discuss, and it's not only kind of giving them a chance to learn about each other and teach each other, but also gives the reader a better idea of like what's going on.
So, what were you trying to accomplish with that conversation? Because this is the first time we really find out a lot about Bree beyond what Robin says about her,
Mm-hmm.
and the little hints that we get at the beginning. What all were you trying to? Um, so, uh, Lewis is kind of a confirmed bachelor, but not inside of a intentional way. It's just I
Mm,
don't like any of the girls around me. So inside of this, I'm imagining that one of your goals was to establish she's actually kind of perfect for him. So
yeah.
how did you go about proving that? Like what were your ideas as you were writing the chapter or the scene to give the reader that impression as well, other than, we know that that's what this story is about, so we expect it to happen.
Right. Well, definitely at the beginning of this chapter, I mentioned that Bree hurting Lewis is kind of a catalyst for him. It's kind of an enough is enough moment where, he's kind of beyond dancing around this issue, and Bree's been hiding from him a lot. She's kind of coming out of her shell a little bit more with each day, working with Jethro, talking, but after she hurts Lewis, she kind of withdraws again, and he's just kind of done. Which is why he goes seeking her room, even though he mentions he knows he's intruding, but he hopes she'll forgive him because he wants to know more about her. Without this her self consciousness or her trying to avoid him between them. So painting out what her room looks like, and then he wants her to explain, like, how do you draw, who were you, tell me things you remember about your life and what this house was like. And that's all a chance for him to get a better idea of who she is, for the reader to get a better idea of who she is. The fact that she kind of had the traditional ladylike upbringing of drawing and dancing, but she hated it all except for the drawing, and was also the kind of girl who wanted to go out in the barn with the dogs and was constantly in trouble for it. That's a very Lewis thing as well. So yeah, it's showing the reader that she really is kind of his type of girl, and also he's starting get more information about her, and but turnabout is fair play, and she asks him about him, and so she gets his story about what happened to him, and it's this is their this is this is in a way, I use this term not as an apt description, but it's kind of like their first date. This is the icebreaker where they're actually starting to talk to each other instead of slightly past each other, because their focus has been the curse. And right now they're more interested in stories of when the servants would sneak her back into the house, or when Jared dropped a rock on Lewis's head to see what would happen. um, so which is a very Jared thing to do.
I grew up with those guys.
I'm
I have a
sure.
friend that he took a homemade spear to the back of the head while he and some other friends were playing Gladiator, and he
Oh
didn't
my
actually realize
god.
until he was taking a shower, and his hand felt really sticky, and he pulled his hand out, and it was just covered in red. He was like, "Oh, that's not good." And
Oh
the
my
extra
gosh.
sad part, he was like 13 at the time. Like this wasn't like 8.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's epic. I don't think we ever got that crazy. But yeah, shenanigans, of course.
I tell people that I grew up with insane people. Like those were my
Yeah,
friends.
yeah.
I was the least sane. I was the least crazy one.
You
Um,
were the voice of reason in the group.
I will just say that that didn't happen while I was there.
Okay. Of course. Well, of course it wouldn't. Right.
um, yeah, so they start to learn a lot about each other's past, and I believe this is where you revealed the mirror. Is when she tells him about it.
That's actually a little bit later in this chapter. Let me see. Or actually, I think it's in the next chapter. Or no, the next chapter is Midas and Eyeless. Let's see. Boy, the mirror is actually kind of traditionally with the rest of well, let me see. I just read it, and
We'll
I
come
need
back
to
to that.
to go back and flip through exactly when does that happen.
Now I know next interview I need to outline as well.
Right.
Well, we'll come back. So, another thing I wanted to ask is, so the part where he talks about the breeze inside of his room not letting him out because he wasn't dressed properly
Right.
was that cracked me up. One, but was that ever actually written as a scene, and you just decided to make it part of this, or was it always just part of this conversation?
Oh, it was always just part of this conversation. Um, there were never enough time really, within the constraint. If I had made this a much longer book, I probably would have written it as a scene. But I had to kind of keep things moving along. Um, so yeah, it just had to kind of stay as a communicated conversation. But I can picture it entirely in my head of exactly how that would go. And you can imagine how crazy that would make you feel, shouting at the wall because you can't leave the house, because you're not wearing the proper silk tie with the right vest. So yeah, that's pretty
It sounds
fun.
awful.
Yeah.
All right. So the end of this chapter is when he gets the note saying, "I found him."
Mhm.
So now you cut. So then the beginning of the next chapter is Eyeless actually finding Midas, and he's trapped inside of a large stone block, and she has to
Mhm.
bust him out. So I don't know, just walk me through that scene. I don't really have any specific questions, but like, why did you want him trapped? Why did uh, yeah? What were you trying to get across? All that.
Yeah, so this I mean, the whole Midas Eyeless side story lies completely outside of the original fairy tale, and it is entirely an answer to my initial question. And one of the initial things that made me write this story was, what's the backstory of the person who makes the curse? I wanted to know more about that, and that's Robin. And, in the original like fairy tales, usually that person makes the curse and goes away. Um, so to make that less of a um, the story ends there. Midas and Eyeless kind of became our other end of that world. And if their whole point is to oppose Robin, if Midas is the strongest one, something had to happen to him where he wasn't around, because Eyeless can only do so much. And she mentioned several times that Midas had asked her to promise not to do anything, while he was gone, to not interfere. And yet again, good intentions. That was meant to keep her safe. And ultimately, it ensured that he stayed trapped for longer, because she was keeping her promise until it went too far, and then she goes looking for him. Um, so he's been missing for centuries, and she's been waiting, expecting him to come back. And as things come to a head with this curse, and with Lewis being trapped in the story, she finally decides, this is done. I'm done waiting. I'm gonna go find him and do whatever I can to bring him back. And so essentially she breaks her promise, but ultimately she asks him to forgive him. And seeing as how she's just wrenched him out of a chunk of rock, it's like, yeah, of course I'm going to forgive you. I can't believe I asked you to do that in the first place. It's that's kind of a my husband and I joke about it all the time. You see these disaster stories or like apocalyptic stories where they're like, you know, um, you wait for me here, I'm going to go on ahead. Or you see the women and children first trope, as it were, where the guys stay behind or go out to do dangerous things. And we always joke that if anything terrible ever happens, we are not leaving each other's side. I don't care. Because I've always hated that trope, just someone is out risking their life, and then somebody is waiting behind, worrying about what could be going on. And I would have a heart attack. I couldn't do it. So in a way, this is Eyeless has agreed to that kind of thing, but she gets fed up and finally goes after him. Uh, so so this whole scene comes straight out of, uh, just what I would imagine a fantastical, magical scenario to be. Of course, it's storming. To me, thunderstorms are. I've grown up in the South, and so thunderstorms are pretty prevalent. I used to be flat out terrified of them, like huddled in a closet crying, terrified of thunderstorms and tornadoes and all of that. And now I love them, and they can be very inspiring to me on a very kind of fantastical level. I couldn't explain to you why. The forest being and woods being that way too. Uh, so all of those elements are present. Um, and I didn't want my just his form of prison being basically a gigantic slab of granite. No cage could really contain him, and other stories show fairies or spirits being trapped like in trees. You see that with Ariel in The Tempest. But seeing as how Midas is like the original Green Man, you couldn't trap him in a tree. That wouldn't really work. So
Please don't
something
throw me in the
completely,
briar patch.
yeah. So ultimately, stone is a very good example of something that could contain him. And another way that had to work, because obviously you see like ivy and tree roots can completely destroy stone. Part of this entrapment was essentially turning him into stone as well. And his thinking became as slow as rock. Eyeless mentions that she was terrified she was going to hurt him because she couldn't really see where the rock ended and where he began. Um, but one of the spells she knows is for breaking rock. It's how she injured Robin, and so she is perfectly situated to rescue her husband when he can't rescue himself. So that's kind of also a perfect puzzle pieces going together with their relationship and their powers. Um, so he would never have been able to save himself until she came along. And we get to see, obviously their conversation about what happened, how this came about. We get to kind of meet him for the first time and also see them interact together. And I've had a very clear picture of Midas this whole time, and I was trying to kind of build him up in bits and pieces for the reader, based on what Eylis would say and Lewis's own kind of imaginings of him. But this is the first time you really see him in the flesh, and so there was a lot to catch up on and a lot to pack into one chapter. While also relating it to everything that was still going on, so it wasn't just kind of a caveat. Which I hope it melded together. When I read this again for the first time, in 6 years, it all felt good to me. But being the writer, of course, it would. So I hope that this chapter kind of tied some threads together and gave more backstory of what was going on and what's been going on and how things are going to move forward now that he's back and can come and try to put things to right at last.
Yeah. I also like the pace kind of picks up at this point too, because
Mm,
the last two chapters have been kind of lackadaisical, but it's like, all right, now the person who can actually do something is out and about again, so
yeah.
things are going to resolve pretty quickly. Um, and so now we get to this is about the time that Lewis finds the mirror because he actually
Yes.
sees Midas with someone he thinks is Eylis because she's shed her old lady appearance, and so he just thinks that looks like what Eylis would look like if she wasn't old.
Yeah.
Um, and so he looks in on everybody, and then he looks in at Jared and Eva and sees that she's pregnant, and Eva actually sees him
Hmm.
um, like in the ceiling, which just sounds horrifying. Why did you want why did you make that choice? Why was Eva able to see him?
Eva is, well, she's obviously one of the only girls in the town who Lewis has a connection with, and she is the one who sends him to the manor in the first place. And even though she doesn't have any like magical powers or anything, I've always kind of imagined her to be, in a fairy tale world, she would be one of those girls who um, has an element of second sight, not necessarily. Let me rephrase that because that makes it sound kind of more uh, um, what's the word, witch like than I mean, but just somebody who can see deeper into things. She would probably be the person who caught sight of a fairy running, behind a tree, or she's just much more observant and kind of has an element of being a real next door neighbor to fantastical things in a way that the more practical people of the town don't. Um, and so, of the people who could probably catch sight of Lewis at this point, she's the only one who makes any sense. Like his aunt never would. Partly because at this point she's getting ill. Uh, Jared is even more pragmatic than Lewis is, and also completely preoccupied with worrying about his wife and his coming baby. We don't really know like George Lewis's partner well enough for him to be able to suddenly, oh, I just saw my young printing partner staring at me out of the ceiling. That would not make any sense whatsoever. But Eva, being kind of the whimsical, um, oddity of the women in the town, she makes a lot of sense in that regard. She climbs trees and she reads big books, and she, goes walking through the this outskirts of the town in the rain. Um, so of the people that we know in the town, Eylis obviously would be another option, but she's not there right now. And
And
at
she
the
already
end of
knows where he
the
is.
and she already knows where he is. Yeah, so it wouldn't be much sense for her to discover him. So Ava was the obvious choice, and it also had a nice parallel scene. So she was the one who sent him there in the first place. She's the one who's going to go get him.
then she finds him. You find out that she actually comes to the mansion like a month later,
Hmm.
um, and pulls him out. And I like that you. I like how you got him. So obviously you needed to have this. The leaving is a very important part of the Beauty and the Beast story, so you had to have your own
Hmm.
twist on it. And I like that you changed it from because Lewis wouldn't just leave because he missed people. That's not
Hmm.
his forte at all. So it was actually a people out here need you situation. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I really like how you handled that. And so one thing that I really liked about Midas's character is because you, like you said, you had built him up pretty heftily, and he had a lot to live up to. And I loved how just how calm he is about everything. Where he's just like, "Yes, we're just going to go back, and I'm just going to kill Robin, basically, and everything will be fine."
Yeah, I've always he's pretty self-possessed, even in the face of disaster, and that's always been kind of a contrast between him and Eyeless that has been very clear in their relationship from the beginning. In that, she's kind of more human, more prone to panic, and thinking the worst of things. But he's been around for so long, and he's very, very much meant to kind of resemble an old tree, not necessarily like physically in how he looks, but the way he behaves. And he's seen quite a lot happen, and he's it takes a lot to ruffle him. And the only thing that really does ruffle him is if he's afraid of something happening to Eyeless. That's when things start to crack a bit for him. And in a way, that was a not the price he paid, but like he could have remained alone and not gotten involved with anyone and unattached, and therefore completely um, uh, without any weakness. But transferring some of his power to Eyeless, their relationship gives him a little bit of a weakness, but it's to him it's worthy. And there's, I suppose, there's that element to any relationship, um, because if you open yourself up to a person, there's the chance you could lose them at any moment. But it's ultimately worth that eventual pain and sorrow. Um, so there's all of these kind of uh, areas of friction throughout the book, and also throughout their characters, and the whole fairy world where everything kind of rubs against each other.
The next chapter, so Eva pulls Lewis out of the house, and uh, um, man, my brain just went completely blank. Bree gives him the usual, "You've got 1 month, and if you don't come
Mm-hmm.
back by then, I will die." Which I will say, so in the original Beauty and the Beast story, the Beast saying that it's like it kind of has some weight to it and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that you meant it this way, but because Bree is Bree, like when she says that, your first thought is you're being a little dramatic here.
Yeah,
Like you don't actually
yeah.
think it's attached to the curse at all. It's just like if you're not back by then, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's meant to be a little bit enigmatic there. I was like, is she being serious? Is this really gonna happen? And like even Lewis, he starts bargaining with himself during that month. He's like, is this part of the curse? Like if I'm late by an hour, a day, like what's actually going to happen? And that element of ambiguity there, I think, makes, his decision of when to return, how soon, how late, really hard. Because it could be he goes back and she's just mad at him, but it could be, I mean, all bets are off. It could actually be a matter of she will die, literally, and in every sense of the word. Um, so yeah, but it is kind of fun. It makes a lot of sense for her to be a bit on on the dramatic side there. It fits in with her character very well.
It's also you also think you've already admitted that you have no idea how time works inside of this house. You wouldn't know if I
Right,
was late.
right, yeah.
I could come back, you'd be like, "It took you forever." It's been a week, Bree.
Hmm.
But anyway, so what? Just one thing that I wanted to ask about your decision is, so about the time that he leaves is when Eyeless and Midas both get back, which is good because his aunt desperately needs for Eyeless to be back. Um,
Mhm.
and so once they get back, he goes out. I think he says hunting for Robin, or like basically establishing a perimeter. And
Mhm.
she cleans up her house. And you actually spent a lot of time talking about her cleaning up the house. Why did you make the decision to focus on her straightening things?
Let me go find that scene. That might have everything to do. Um, let's see. Well, it's a bit of her home is a form of her power. She when Robin first appears and he's like sitting in her chair, she comes in, she lights all the candles, makes him move, and then sits down, and it's like she's in charge now. So that element hasn't gone away. And the fact that she's been gone for however long, and things are dusty, and there's weeds in the yard, her tidying up the house is kind of regaining control and power over her place in this town. There's a little bit of me in that too. I don't know that it's an actual thing, but I describe it as spatial anxiety. And if my home isn't clean and tidy and everything is where it needs to go, I literally feel like things are coming apart. Um, there's definitely a sense of ritual and a sense of almost a kind of magic itself of her putting things back in order, and I'm here now, and establishing her presence again through the cleaning of her home. It's definitely something I would do the moment I came back from a long time away. And it also is kind of related to getting her home ready for Midas, to come back, and having it all set. All of that kind of ties together, in a way that she doesn't have a whole lot to give him in this little town that he's been away from for so long, but she can at least make sure the house is clean, and there's a bit of domesticity there. So even though she doesn't fulfill most, if just about any of the kind of traditional female roles, this is one she actually likes, and wants to do. And there's an element, like I said, of my own kind of perceptions there, on wanting to be able to run around barefoot, and do archery and have a bunch of dogs, and be pretty wild and free. But also I like to clean and cook, so sue me. So she has that to her as well, and doesn't feel the need to apologize for any of it. um, I've always kind of hated the all or nothing idea that, you either are the complete tomboy and you don't do anything, quote unquote feminine, or you're just a complete and utter girly girl. And I'm like, you can be both at the same time. Um, I remember, I've got a couple of friends, who I work with at the Renaissance Festival, and you see all kinds of little girls running around in princess costumes. And if anyone ever, turned to one of these little girls and said, "Oh, you look so pretty," they would be like, "No, no, no, you need to tell them they're smart." Because they're trying to push against these ideas that your value is in your looks or in your femininity. And I get that to a certain extent, but I'm like, you can be a pink fluffy princess and still like be an astrophysicist if you want to. This idea that you have to be either the geek girl who's kind of plain and frumpy, or the cheerleader. It's yet again, it's just pervading a problem from the other side. And so Eyeless, is that ideal for me. Anyway, all of that kind of looping back to cleaning the house, that's where that whole idea comes from.
I wrote a screenplay with the same friend I wrote a musical with, and we actually started filming at one point because we kind of want to revisit it at some point because we really like the script. But there was a character named Rebel who was a girl, and she was she was a more exaggerated version of one of my sisters, and she was
Right.
actually playing her while
That's
we were
awesome.
filming it. But like, there's a scene where there's like the climax of this weird short film that we wrote is literally a conflict between the main characters and a bounty hunter that is after them over a misunderstanding, and she gets like knocked unconscious for a little while. Once she wakes up, she walks just straight to her car, pops the hood, pulls out a baseball bat, and just basically knocks him senseless. And earlier she's like complaining because she got mud on her dress,
That's
and
awesome.
we had a reading, and one of the people that was there just to give notes, he was like, I don't understand the character of Rebel, because like she's acting extremely girly and she's like doing her nails in this scene, but then just as soon as things get tough, like she just beats the crap out of people. And
Right.
my sister was there, just like, Daniel, don't worry about it, I know exactly how this girl works.
It's like, yes, human beings are complicated. What an amazing thing we're discovering here.
But it was
Yeah.
funny because once he made that note, once he said that, I was like, she actually is an odd person. um,
No, she sounds like someone I would get along with very well.
all right. So getting back to your story, so the I knew about again, I'm very familiar with the Beauty and the Beast story, and so I sensed the obligatory he's delayed, and he
Hmm.
doesn't go back right on time like he's supposed to. And so I was curious as it was building up to that, because I was wondering how you were going to pull that off, because Lewis had such a sense of duty and he was very aware of the time and everything. Um, was it difficult to figure out the reason that he was delayed, which is ultimately that Eva goes into labor, and he has to be
Hmm.
there for his friend, because labor was a much more frightening ordeal back then,
Right.
and so he can't go back. And was it hard for you to come up with that? Did you wrestle with how you were going to make him stay, or did it come kind of naturally?
I think I initially thought it was going to be Myrtle being ill because that's what gets him to leave in the first place. But as I was writing it, um, I initially, wrote that, when Lewis is looking through the mirror and he sees Jared and Ava and, oh, she's pregnant, that's, a sign that time is moving on. But as we were leading up to this, I was like, oh, she's pregnant. Babies come when they want to. And it's kind of funny when I read this because when I wrote this book, I didn't have any nieces or nephews yet. None of my siblings had any children yet. And so my experience with like people, having the, going into labor and what that's actually like when you're really close to someone, hadn't really developed yet. But reading it again after that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it's like. Everyone kind of goes, even, today where we know doctors are really good and, this is more of a routine thing and, bad stuff happening, it's much rarer, not impossible, but much rarer. And, having a child is not, at least the act of labor is not the life or death situation it used to be. But everyone still kind of goes on high alert and do I go, do we need me at the hospital? Where should I go? Where should I be? Where do I sit? It's very much kind of a frantic thing, just out of the excitement and, just being ready for whatever happens. And so that added the, especially with Myrtle, she's getting better because of Eyeless's ministrations. Anything that happened to her at that point would be kind of a sore thumb, that would lead Lewis to stay, and probably would be a much more long term thing, as opposed to Ava suddenly going into labor. Um, this is something that's going to be all consuming for a little while, but when it's over, oh crap, right, I'm supposed to be back by now. And so in that regard, it was a very easy decision that this is going to be the thing that distracts him. Because anything else, either would have distracted him for way too long, or wouldn't have been a big enough thing to keep him from returning. But one of your dear friends, having a baby, this could be, feasibly speaking, it could kill her and the baby, and then what? That's enough of a distraction to make you forget that, it's been 18 hours and all of a sudden you've missed your deadline.
It was a really good decision. It took me by surprise, not in like a oh that not in like a shocking way, but in a oh that is a very good way to handle it.
Right.
um,
Well, and
like
it's
I
it's
had a
it's 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 kind of hilarious. I think I added this in edits, but at one point, Lewis mentions to Ilis that Ava's pregnant, and she's like, "Ah, don't worry about it. She's got another month. We've already established that the timeline is a month," and it's just like foreshadowing. So yeah, that was definitely something that I kind of added after the fact. So that was kind of fun. Yeah.
yeah, and that is the way that people react. Like my best friend, when his wife went into labor, I was working at a restaurant at the time, and
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever done that, but you have no idea when you're getting out. When you go
Right.
into work, it's like, well, I have to wait for things to slow down. Then I have to wait for things to slow down enough that my manager's comfortable saying I can go home. And so I was
Right.
going around to everybody and just being like, um, so my best friend's wife is in labor. I've known him since I was 6 years old, and if you could take my shift as soon as you're cut, that would be fantastic because I have to drive an hour south to get to that hospital.
Right.
And everybody was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's a big deal."
Yeah. Well, I remember when yeah, when Alicia had Seth, my first nephew, that was definitely kind of the first grandchild in the family. It was a big thing. And even though I wasn't there when he was born, we sat at the hospital for a good 4 hours, just kind of on standby. And that was it was a very exciting time. And even when nothing is happening, there's definitely a sense of like frenetic energy going on. So yeah, it's exciting.
So also while he is out of the house, we talked about it earlier, is when his aunt realizes that he is in love and points it out to him.
Hmm.
And so a couple of things that you accomplished here was one, he realizes that outside of the house, and it makes him go back to the house with more of a purpose. But also, you kind of set it up so that his excuse of just being um, gone for a while actually kind of explains Bree's sudden appearance of, oh, he was out of town doing something for business for a year, and he met this girl. So was that
Hmm.
intentional, or was that a happy accident of
I think that was a
you
happy
accidentally
accident.
gave the excuse?
Yeah, I didn't even think about it until you just mentioned it. So yeah, that did work out well. And partly the I think that's a really great resolution to it. Yet again, yay subconscious or unintentional things, because oftentimes that element of the beast character being released and coming back and the wedding in a normal world, there would be a lot of questions as to who is this guy slash girl, where did they come from, especially in a small town like this where everyone knows everyone. And usually this is kind of just where the last elements of the magic do their thing and it's all okay. But Lewis being
You
gone
bought
for
the
a
ticket.
year. Yeah, yeah. Lewis being gone for a year and courting a young lady while he was gone and bringing her back to marry, that makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, definitely a happy accident, not anything I planned on.
So why did you decide to have him realize that he was in love with Bree during his absence? Was that something that uh, was that your plan, or was it while you were writing it you just realized that this is the right time?
Boy, I think it was a couple of things. I think it was a I've always hated the phrase absence makes the heart grow fonder. But I do think there's a lot of truth to it because you have more time for self reflection. That's definitely true in my experience. Uh, uh, in terms of like, how my husband's and I courted, and our long relationship before we eventually got married. I came to the realization that, holy crap, I like this guy completely by myself. And, not like while we were together, we started as friends. And I remember distinctly like sitting in, the, I think it was the mail room at, my college, going, if I never spoke to him again, I would be devastated. And that was my ding moment of realizing, that I loved him. And uh, this is kind of a similar thing, where he's gone, he's not with her, and he has time to kind of analyze his own thoughts separate from the situation. And I think it also made sense for Myrtle to point it out to him. She's been so intent on getting him, hooked up with a girl and, respectably married and not a bachelor anymore. And so for her to kind of notice, wait a second, it's finally happening, I think was a lovely, moment for them to share as well. Uh, and it's kind of like, whenever someone is starting to develop feelings that they don't see yet, and like one of their friends or or family members points it out, and it's like, don't you know what's happening here? So that was kind of all wrapped up into what was going on there, and often that is also used in the fairy tale, where some kind of inklings of feelings are occurring before the person leaves, but it really comes to a head while they're gone, because they've got what they wanted, they're back with their family, but they can't stop thinking of what they left behind. And that also ties into the willingly going back, even though they don't know that anything is going to be different, that the curse is going to be broken soon. To their mind, they're going back and leaving their family and friends again. And you know that, I think, ties into the fairy tale and how the curse breaks as well.
So, uh, baby's born. It's a girl, and he realize, and then it suddenly occurs to me, wait a minute, what time is it? And he goes running off to the estate to be with his love, and Robin intervenes and trips him and basically tries to keep him from going there,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of paints it as he's taunting him, saying she's already dead and all this stuff. But then you're also thinking in the back of your mind, then why are you trying to stop me?
Yeah.
Yeah, but so this was another great show don't tell with Midas's just awesomeness, where um, uh, Eyeless is watching it, and she's dumbstruck. She doesn't know what to do. She can't. She tries something, it doesn't really work, and she's just thinking, "Where in the world is Midas?" And he just kind of like appears, like he was just waiting for the most dramatic moment to do so. Um,
Right.
uh, so he intervenes, basically just tells Lewis, I'll take care of this. You go back to the house. And and then there's a fight between Robin and Midas. So all that's leading up to the question. Why did you decide to have the Fae climax, the Fae story climax, before Lewis gets back to the house and breaks the curse?
I definitely wanted the curse breaking to be the final thing. It's so off. I don't think I've ever read a story where it wasn't the final thing. And I didn't want this epic Fae battle to occur afterwards, because I feel like it would have stolen the thunder from that moment. Um, and also, Eyeless and Midas make an appearance right after the curse is broken and everything's done. So going back at that point to what had happened, I felt like it just wouldn't have flowed together in terms of a nice storyline. Um, and we're already right there with the three of them, and Lewis is the one who leaves, so it felt like a better resolution to have that take place. All of that is done, and then we go and we see, oh my gosh, what is happening in the house. Um, so that was entirely kind of just story building, in terms of what I think would have made the most technical sense. um, uh, and especially because Robin I felt like Robin needed to be taken care of before the curse was broken. Um, and I didn't want, um, I didn't really, at this point he's already lost essentially. But if the curse was broken and Bree gets out, she's another potential collateral damage. Because Robin, he's clearly been ready to do everything. And I think if the curse had been broken and then the epic battle happened, it would have made perfect sense for him to try to kill her at that point.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
was actually just thinking that.
yeah, and if I had done that, that's exactly what he would have tried to do. He already tries to kill Eyeless because at this point he's just trying to cause as much pain as possible. He's kind of past subtlety and long suffering revenge, and at this point he's just trying to get as many shots in as he can. So I think it made the most kind of tactical sense to have this scene happen first.
Agreed. I just wanted to know why you thought so. So Lewis goes back. He finds her half dead, lying inside of her bedroom. He tells her to ask. He understands how to break the curse now. He tells her to ask him to marry her, and he says yes. And then everything break. The whole curse breaks. You find out that she did actually age slightly, and so she actually like blossomed into a beautiful woman. She was an ugly
Mhm.
duckling before. Um, why did you decide to do that? Was it like he saw the inner beauty and oh look, she's actually physically beautiful. That's a nice surprise as well.
Yeah, it was funny because reading it again, if I were to go back, I might have made a different choice because it seemed a little bit like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm more cynical now as a reader. It seemed to me like, and I didn't intend this when I was writing it, obviously, but I could see how someone would look at that and be like, oh, so her physical beauty does matter, as opposed to, what she is as a person. And so I might have made a slightly different decision if I was reading it or if I was writing it today. But ultimately, the idea was that most of her perception of her ugliness was internal. And I think a lot of you look at the statistics of women particularly, but men too. There's a lot of you know people today, especially with social media and Instagram models and everything, where people have this unrealistic expectation of what they should look like, and we judge ourselves so harshly for not living up to certain um, you see this a lot talked about with like women and Victoria's Secret models. I saw an amazing article that someone wrote up about, like, especially with all the Marvel superheroes, the unrealistic expectations for men, where you've got these Christians and these people who get like just insanely ripped for these superhero roles. What you don't know is that 3 hours later they had to go like and recover in the hospital because they were hours away from basically having like a heart attack because of how insanely dehydrated and unfed they were to get to that level. And yet we expect, we being a broad term, people to look like this all the time. And so, blah, 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 social, uh, 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 perceptions aside, this was meant less as oh, she's beautiful now because beautiful is what matters. And it was more supposed to highlight that what she envisioned herself as was never actually what was going on. And she always was more beautiful than she realized. Um, so like I said, I think I might have made a different choice, or at least tweaked it a little bit, because I always, as a writer, I always imagined her as this um, uh, lovely young woman on the inside, and that once the curse was broken, she would be who she really was and not tied down to this this wayward girl who everyone thought was just so not worth presenting to the world. But so that was the intention. And so if anyone reading this thinks it was meant to be oh yeah, your looks do matter. That wasn't the point. And hopefully it didn't. I felt like it read that way a little bit. Hopefully that was just me. But
Yeah, I don't care. I was thinking, if I were to do it, I think that one thing that I would try to do, because I think it would be funny, would be to uh, look back, set it far back enough so that it's like she didn't meet the beauty standards of when she was transformed, but inside of like the modern era that she was now in,
right.
like how she looked was considered beautiful. And so she's like, "What? No, I'm hideous." He's like, "No, but you have this and this." She's like, "I know, that's hideous." And he's like, "No, no, that's awesome."
You've got some catching up to do. Yeah, that would be a good one. That'd be a great way to do it. So,
Um, so the one thing that actually bothered me a little bit about the story was that you never told us what Bree's real name is. I'm just curious why not?
because she doesn't know, and I think they could have gone digging for it. I'm sure there would have been historical records of who lived in the manor back when, and who owned it, and what their children were, but um, uh, it wasn't anything they were interested in. They're starting a new life, and she wanted to keep the name that Lewis gave her, and not go back hunting ghosts. That portion of her life is done, and ultimately, she is thinking about uh, you know regaining her new life. And so it never occurred to me as a writer to have them go looking for that. I think it would have yet again needed a longer book for that to come up without it seeming like a tack on at the end. Oh, we discovered these records, and oh, look, there's her real name. And also, as a reader, you've known her as Bree for this whole book, and introducing a new name that you now have to reconcile her with wouldn't have really been helpful or useful, I think. Um, and maybe it would have been good, yet again, if it was a longer book, I could imagine them finding these records, and oh, this is your name, and she's like, I prefer Bree, and she stays that way, but makes a conscious choice of it. That would have been a good way to do it. But in the time constraints that I had, or the length constraints, I should say, and also the goal of creating this new life free of the spell and free of her past, going back and finding out what her old name was wouldn't have served that goal.
Hmm. So also, in so a whole lot happens once the curse is broken. Why did
Yeah.
you decide for the servants to not make it?
Um, it was a couple of things. One, it would have yet again required another chapter or so, I think, to reconcile like what happened to them and where they're going to go and what's going to happen to them now. Um, Also because I've never been fully satisfied with the curse, traditionally not having collateral damage. The curse is broken and everything's okay. And Robin, to me, that doesn't sound like something he would do. Ultimately, the only person who survived was Bree, and she was the only one ever going to get out of it. And the illusions of the horses making sounds, or the people still serving in the house, they were always illusions meant to taunt her. They were never really there. And in the conversation that Lewis and Bree have in her bedroom, where she's like, maybe they're still here, but she's horrified that maybe she's hurt one of them, because she's had these rampages where she's broken furniture and glasses and torn the house apart. Feasibly speaking, the curse could protect them from that, but they were never there to be hurt in the first place. Um, so it just seemed more like the kind of curse Robin would pull. Him being a much more malicious character, and the point was never to save all of them. Bree was the only one who could ever be saved, and so there's a bit of sobering to that, where it's not a perfectly happily ever after. This was a tragedy that occurred, and there are some things that can't be fixed from it.
Mm. So they get married, and then live happily ever after, presumably, as long as the publishing market doesn't crash.
Yeah.
um, which 1800s, I think they're good for a little while. Um, and and then Ilis and Midas go wandering off, which
Mhm.
I'm just going to pitch this idea to you of writing a couple of sequels with them, because I almost started to see them as like a fantasy version of the Doctor and his companion, and I just think that would be a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, I've wanted so badly to do a book of just them, like where they're the main characters, and I think I will at some point. I just haven't 100% figured out when or how. They make a couple of like very brief cameos in a couple other books. Roaring Boys, which is available. They Ooh, or did I edit this out? I can't remember. I believe in the first draft, Roaring Boys went through some very serious edits. But the first draft they make a cameo appearance. I believe it's still in there, but I'd have to go and double check. Um, but another book that sadly is not available, but is with my agent right now. I think I mentioned my Red Riding Hood story, which is set in Russia. Mitis is actually a side character in that book. He plays the court minstrel, and this is pre-Ilis. This is the 13th century, but that's the story of where he gets his wolves. So that was kind of I've kind of tried to incorporate them into a few of my other stories, but I would absolutely love to write um, one of a book that's just about them, either pre-shifted or post. Probably pre, just because that's the Renaissance time period is one that I really love writing in. But yeah, I totally agree, and it should happen, and hopefully will at some point.
I hope you enjoyed learning about the conclusion of Shifted Story and the thinking that went into how it was written. Next episode, we will continue our interview with Caitlyn, where we'll discuss what she's working on right now, as well as other books she's finished and is trying to make available to you as soon as possible. So if you want to support Caitlyn and her storytelling, it's as simple as purchasing her books. Shifted and The Roaring Boys are both available on Amazon. If you'd like to support this podcast, please subscribe to it on your preferred podcast deliverer. Give it a 5-star review rating to make us more visible, and share it with your friends that are just interested in storytelling and how writers work. You can also become a patron on patreon.com/thinking2inking. If you're a writer of a published or self-published book or viewable film or play who would like to appear on this podcast, you can email me at think2inkpodcast@gmail.com. Links to all the above can be found in the podcast description. I'm TJ, and we'll talk to you next time. From Thinking to Inking is a bookworm podcast from Corticate Entertainment. Theme music is an original composition by and property of Hannah Ausband Scheidt. She may be contacted at hannahausbandscheidt.com, HANNAHAUSBANDSCHEIDT.com.